Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. You know, when you wade into the intense, really high-stakes world of online religious debates, specifically those fiery, relentless collisions between arguments for God and the tenets of atheism, you'd probably expect to find, I don't know, profound, elevated philosophical discourse.
Right, you'd think so.
Yeah, but what actually happens when the defense of faith becomes less about discovering ultimate truth and, well, more about protecting your ego, like securing a win and just proving your intellectual superiority. Today's deep dive is a candid, totally unfiltered look into that exact phenomenon. We're exploring the intense intellectual and emotional friction of online apologetics, drawing from a really striking reflection by Cameron Bertuzzi of the Capturing Christianity channel.
Yeah, it's a fascinating source.
It really is. He recently laid bare 12 major mistakes Christian apologists make, and we're going straight into the psychology, the ego, and the intellectual honesty, or lack thereof, that drives these massive existential battles. But really quickly, before we dive into all of that, I want to say to you listening, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. Okay, so let's unpack this. What exactly is our mission for this deep dive today?
Well, our mission is really to map out the psychological pitfalls of human beings arguing over ultimate truths. We are using Cameron's insider perspective on Christian apologetics, basically to understand human nature under extreme intellectual pressure. And right at the top, I want to set a very clear boundary for us.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because as hosts, we are not taking a theological stance here today.
No.
We're not endorsing Christianity, nor are we endorsing atheism or, any other worldview. We are strictly acting as observers. We're just analyzing the original material to understand the mechanics, the friction, and honestly, the deeply human failures that occur in these debates.
Right. We're looking at the players on the field, not debating the rules of the game itself. And Bertuzzi begins right at the root of almost every debate failure known to mankind, which is human ego.
Oh, absolutely. Ego is everything here.
It's wild how the desire to defend the existence of God often operates as this really convenient, shiny mask for personal insecurities.
It is the perfect camouflage. I mean, think about it. If you are arguing about sports or politics, people can easily spot your ego. It's obvious. But if you claim you're defending the creator of the universe, your arrogance can just be disguised as righteous zeal.
Oh, wow, that is such a good point.
Right. And Bertuzzi highlights this explicitly. He warns debaters not to think too highly of themselves and to stop shooting from the hip, as he puts it. To really understand the mechanics of why intelligent people do this, we have to look at the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Okay, yeah, break that down for us, because that's the psychological phenomenon where people who know just a little bit about a subject mistakenly think they're absolute experts.
Exactly. It's a well-known cognitive bias. When you're a beginner at something, you literally don't know enough to realize how much you don't know.
Right, you have a massive blind spot.
Precisely. Your brain creates a blind spot. So less competent people wildly overestimate their intelligence, while highly competent people who understand the vast, crushing complexity of a subject, they actually often underestimate theirs.
Because they know how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Exactly. So in the context of debating God versus atheism, someone might read 2 or 3 introductory apologetics books. Suddenly they feel equipped to take on the world. But reading a beginner's guide doesn't make you an expert in astrophysics or probability theory or, ancient Near Eastern history.
It's like someone reading WebMD for an hour, looking up the symptoms of a stomachache, and then confidently walking into an operating room demanding a scalpel.
Yes, that is the exact dynamic.
You wouldn't trust that person to perform surgery on you. So when we debate these monumental concepts, like the origins of the universe or the tenets of atheism, why does our ego suddenly convince us we hold PhDs? I mean, I want to push you on this a bit because there's something specific to religion here, isn't there? Does the structure of apologetics itself inherently tempt people to bluff?
How do you mean?
Well, if you feel you are defending an omniscient, all-knowing God, does admitting your own ignorance somehow feel like a betrayal of the faith? Like you're letting the home team down?
Oh man, that is a profound dilemma. And honestly, it's the core tension of the whole enterprise. Yes, the structure absolutely tempts bluffing. When you act as an ambassador for a belief system that claims to hold ultimate, absolute truth, the psychological pressure to have an answer for every single objection is crushing.
I can imagine.
Yeah, because if an atheist asks you a highly specific historical question and you just say, I don't know, the fear is that your I don't know will be interpreted by the audience as God doesn't exist.
Which is a terrifying leap for a believer.
Completely terrifying. And Bertuzzi gives a very specific, real-world example of this trap. He talks about a scenario where a skeptic asks an apologist for extra biblical evidence, so, meaning evidence outside of the Bible regarding the martyrdom of early Christians.
Okay, pretty specific question.
Right. Now, if the apologist hasn't actually studied Roman historical records or first century antiquity, they don't know the answer. But the immense pressure of the moment makes them panic. The temptation is to just blurt out confidently that tons of evidence exists, rather than just admitting ignorance.
Which completely destroys their credibility the second the other person says, great, name one.
Exactly. It destroys credibility, and at its core, it's intellectually dishonest. You are essentially lying to defend the truth, which is a massive contradiction.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Bertuzzi points out that uncovering an area of your own ignorance should be an exciting opportunity to learn and grow. But the ego despises looking foolish online. He suggests this overarching theory that a massive amount of online debating is actually just the result of unchecked insecurities.
Wait, really? Like across the board?
Across the board. People, whether they are devout Christians, staunch atheists, or agnostics, are deeply insecure about their beliefs and their own intelligence. So they engage in these endless aggressive debates, not to discover truth, but just to be validated.
To prove to an audience of strangers just how smart they are.
Yep, exactly.
So it's not actually about saving souls or proving that atheism is the most rational worldview.
Yeah.
It's about getting a gold star in the comment section.
That is exactly what it becomes.
And this brings us perfectly into how this underlying insecurity manifests in actual day-to-day conversations. Because once that ego trap is set, it morphs into this incredibly toxic compulsion to just win interactions, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The addiction to the win. And Bertuzzi has a fascinating but incredibly difficult rule for this. He simply says, don't have the last word.
Which is physically impossible for about 90% of the internet.
Totally impossible.
I mean, you can feel the physical itch when someone replies to you, and you just want to drop that final, mic drop comment.
Because it's a neurochemical hit. Leaving the last comment in a thread gives you a literal dopamine rush. It can become an idol, something you value far more than the actual subject you are debating. Apologists, he notes, feel this immense, crushing pressure to respond to every single comment from atheists or Muslims on platforms like Twitter or Reddit.
Just to keep the volley going.
Right, because in the arena of internet blood sports, if you stop responding, your silence is weaponized against you. You get accused of intellectual cowardice or incompetence.
Oh, the classic internet logic. He didn't reply to my tweet within 20 minutes, therefore I have completely dismantled his entire worldview.
Exactly. And so the debates just cycle endlessly into the void. To combat this addiction to the final word, Bertuzzi advises a strict ratio. He says you need to read twice as much as you debate.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. For every hour you spend arguing in a comment section, you should be spending 2 hours reading credible, peer-reviewed experts. He poses this great, highly relatable scenario. He says, imagine you're sitting at your computer, about to fire off an angry Facebook comment. Stop and look at your desk.
Okay.
Should you continue fighting in these comments, or should you go open that new philosophy book you just bought that's literally still sitting in its shipping package?
Right. Keep the main thing the main thing.
Sure.
But what happens when they do decide to engage? Because he also drops a massive warning against being a jerk, right? And we've all seen this. Winning through pure, unfiltered snark.
Yeah, and Bertuzzi is surprisingly candid about his own failures here. He admits to using snark to win arguments on Twitter in the past. And it's important to understand how people win when they completely abandon intellectual honesty.
How do they do it?
Well, some win by making a caricature of the opposing view, like mockingly asking a Catholic, are you seriously telling me you think a cracker and some wine literally turns into human blood?
Yeah. Just reducing it to absurdity.
Right. It's designed to humiliate, not to understand. Or they win by psychoanalyzing the other side instead of addressing their actual argument, throwing out dismissive blanket statements like, every Christian is just emotionally needy, or every atheist just wants to sin.
Okay, here's where I have to look at this whole methodology and ask a serious question. If the ultimate goal of an apologist is sharing what they believe to be a profound, life-altering truth about God's love, how does acting like a snarky internet troll achieve that?
It doesn't.
I mean, think about it like giving a toddler a hammer. Have you ever noticed that when someone first learns about logical fallacies, suddenly every single argument they hear looks like a nail?
Oh, 100%.
They just run around the internet shouting, straw man, ad hominem, red herring. Instead of actually seeking truth, it feels like they are weaponizing these terms as a smokescreen, just to avoid having to grapple with really good objections.
You've hit on exactly what Bertuzzi calls the abuse of apologetics. And the mechanics of why this happens are really fascinating. Learning the rules of logical inference and memorizing a list of logical fallacies, it can feel like you've been handed an intellectual superpower.
Sure, it feels empowering.
Right. But if you aren't emotionally mature, it devolves into exploiting technicalities. Let's say an atheist shares a genuine, deeply personal, perhaps philosophically messy objection to faith, maybe something rooted in their own experience with suffering. Instead of listening to the heart of the argument, the amateur debater just spots a slight structural flaw, recites the Latin name of a fallacy, and declares victory.
It's the ultimate intellectual panic button. It completely shuts down vulnerability.
Exactly. It's a way of avoiding the difficult, messy reality of human doubt. They aren't seeking truth in that moment. They are seeking a shield.
It's just intellectual dodgeball. And the scariest part is, once an apologist gets addicted to this, to dodging real questions, hunting for fallacies, and fighting for the last word, it doesn't just stay online, does it? It bleeds into their actual real life.
Which brings us to the tragedy of forgetting how to just be a normal human being.
Yeah, this is where it gets really personal. It creates this impossible intellectual burden that actually rewires how you interact with the people you love most. Bertuzzi shares this humorous but deeply poignant anecdote about how his obsession with debate actually damaged his ability to have a normal conversation.
Oh, wow.
He talks about a time his wife asked him a completely mundane question, something about money or their budget, and instead of just answering her like a normal husband, his brain snapped into apologetics mode.
Oh, no. Please tell me he didn't cross-examine his wife.
He essentially did. He demanded that she first define her terms. He said something along the lines of, "Well, honey, before we can discuss this, what exactly do you mean by money?" That is hilarious, but it's also incredibly tragic. You spend all this time learning to communicate the ultimate meaning of the universe, the grand design of existence, and you end up literally unable to have a normal chat with your spouse about the grocery budget because your brain won't turn off.
Because your brain is stuck in a permanent defensive loop. You're treating your partner like a hostile witness in a debate. You've lost the ability to just be present.
Yeah.
And to avoid this kind of mental short-circuiting and to manage the impossibly massive scope of the God versus atheism debate, Bertuzzi recommends a major structural shift for anyone in this space, he says. Stop trying to master every subject.
Because you'll just burn out trying to be a biologist, a historian, and a philosopher all before breakfast.
Precisely. You simply cannot be an expert in evolutionary biology, quantum cosmology, ancient Greek translation, and moral philosophy all at once. It's impossible.
So what's the alternative?
The strategy to avoid burnout and to stay sane is picking one highly specific area of interest and mastering only that. Bertuzzi uses his own channel as an example. He realized he was spreading himself way too thin, so he decided to focus intensely on what's called the argument from contingency.
Okay, let's make sure everyone is with us. Give us the quick elevator pitch on what the argument from contingency actually is.
Sure. Broadly speaking, it's the philosophical idea that everything in the universe is contingent, meaning it relies on something else to exist. You exist because of your parents. A tree exists because of a seed.
Cause and effect, basically.
Exactly. The argument tries to trace all these dominoes back to one necessary, uncaused thing that started the entire chain reaction, which apologists argue is God. So instead of trying to learn every argument for faith, Bertuzzi just focused on this one specific concept. He began memorizing the work of a philosopher named Josh Rasmussen, consuming literally everything he could on that one hyper-specific topic.
So we are moving from the jack-of-all-trades debater to an army of highly focused specialists. But I have to ask you, does this shift toward specialization fundamentally change the nature of how atheism and Christianity will interact in the future? Like, if everyone is just hyper-fixated on one tiny microscopic sliver of philosophy, do we lose the big picture?
That is the exact trade-off we are looking at. If the next wave of apologists becomes an army of specialists, as Bertuzzi hopes, the debates will undoubtedly become far more rigorous and academic. You won't have the Dunning-Kruger amateurs shooting from the hip about quantum physics when they only have a degree in history.
Right.
But the risk is severe fragmentation. If it takes a panel of 10 different PhD specialists to answer one existential question from an everyday atheist, the conversation totally loses its accessibility.
It becomes a peer-reviewed academic journal instead of a conversation about the human soul. And this relentless focus, this constant grinding intellectual combat leads directly to our final and definitely our most serious theme today. The severe, sometimes devastating toll all this takes on a person's soul, their morals, and their mental health.
Yeah, this is where the reflection gets incredibly sobering. Bertuzzi insists on absolute moral and intellectual accountability. He identifies pride as the #1 pitfall that destroys people in this space. But he points out that intellectual rigor isn't enough to save you. He brings up the horrifying reports regarding Ravi Zacharias as the ultimate cautionary tale.
And for anyone listening who might not be familiar with that name, we should clarify why that's such a massive deal in this world.
Yes, definitely. Ravi Zacharias was a giant in the apologetics space. For decades, he filled stadiums, wrote best-selling books, and was widely considered the untouchable, brilliant intellectual champion of the Christian faith. But after his death, horrifying, verified reports emerged detailing a double life of systemic predatory sexual abuse.
It was a massive shock to that community.
It was, and Bertuzzi brings this up as absolute proof that being an intellectual defender of the faith does not make someone immune to moral failure.
In fact, it almost seems like the intellect might provide a cover for it, you know? If you are viewed by thousands of people as the intellectual champion of God, your followers might be far less likely to question your private behavior. Your brilliance becomes your shield.
Exactly. It creates a dangerous untouchability. Bertuzzi warns that leaders and teachers are held to a higher standard, and ignoring moral accountability is the single worst decision one can make. And this ties directly into another trap, which is spiritual neglect.
How so?
Well, this is the irony of the whole profession. Apologists can get so consumed by the intellectual propositions of Christianity, memorizing the philosophical arguments, analyzing the historical data, constantly battling atheists in comment sections, that they actually forget the core of their own faith. They forget about Jesus. They forget about prayer.
It's the ultimate tragic irony. You spend so much of your life arguing aggressively for God that you forget to actually talk to him.
Bertuzzi poses a brilliant diagnostic question for anyone engaged in this kind of work. What is the ratio of time you spend reading your religious texts versus reading philosophy? And, even more pointedly, what is the ratio of time you spend praying versus debating atheists online?
Wow. That is a massive gut check.
It really is.
And if that ratio is completely out of whack, the consequences aren't just spiritual, they are deeply psychological. Which brings us to the 12th, and according to Bertuzzi, the most important mistake on his list: neglecting mental health.
Yeah. Regularly engaging in these high-stakes adversarial debates is incredibly toxic for the nervous system. Bertuzzi is exceptionally vulnerable in this section. He confesses that engaging in online apologetics has caused him severe anxiety and, at times, deep depression.
I really want to sit with the paradox here, because this is wild to me. Religion, at its very core, is fundamentally supposed to offer peace, spiritual grounding, a sense of hope and community. Yet here is a major creator admitting that constantly battling atheists online brings him profound anxiety and depression. Is the modern arena of online debate fundamentally incompatible with spiritual well-being?
That is the ultimate question. And I think the answer lies in the tension between the medium and the message. The internet, specifically platforms like Twitter or YouTube, is algorithmically designed for conflict.
Right.
It prioritizes outrage, snark, and endless addictive back and forths. But spiritual well-being, historically, requires stillness, humility, and contemplation. You simply cannot find stillness in a Twitter thread.
You really can't.
Bertuzzi admits that a massive amount of his own stress was driven by pride. He saw other debaters who appeared to be handling the pressure flawlessly, and he wanted to project that same invulnerable alpha intellectual image.
But the secret is, nobody's actually handling it well, are they? It's all just projection.
Right. He reveals that many people in this space who look like they are gracefully handling the stress of constant online combat are actually falling apart behind the scenes. He shares his own deeply personal journey of having to take extended breaks, learning the power of saying no to huge debate platforms to protect his mind, and even needing a few years of trial and error with different medications just to find a combination that helped him manage the intense psychological toll this work took on him.
And he mentions a very specific lie that people tell themselves when they hit that wall. And I think this applies to anyone listening, regardless of whether you're debating religion, working in a high-stress corporate job, or dealing with family drama. The lie that my situation is too unique for anyone to help.
It's a massive, unevidenced lie, and it's exactly how the ego isolates us. The ego tells the apologist, you are carrying the literal weight of defending God's existence. No secular mental health professional could possibly understand your unique cosmic burden.
But that's just the ego talking.
Exactly, because the reality is, human neurochemistry doesn't care about your philosophy. Burnout is burnout. Anxiety is anxiety. Seeking a mental health professional is vital, and stepping away from the keyboard is often the most faithful, healthy thing a person can do. Bertuzzi explicitly notes that there is absolutely nothing in the Bible that suggests you should be battling atheists on the internet for 4 hours every single day.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground here today, from the heights of philosophical specialization and the Dunning-Kruger effect to the deep, heavy valleys of mental health and online toxicity. So when we step back, what does this all mean for how we understand human nature?
Well, if we synthesize this entire journey, we've seen how defending something as profound as a belief in God is fraught with dangerous psychological traps. When apologetics is fueled by a fragile ego, a relentless desire to win at all costs, and a complete lack of personal boundaries, it doesn't lead to enlightenment.
Far from it.
It leads to intellectual dishonesty like bluffing about historical evidence just to save face. It leads to broken relationships, like losing the ability to speak normally and empathetically to your own spouse. And it leads to severe mental health crises, overwhelming anxiety, and even catastrophic moral failures. The pursuit and defense of truth requires profound humility, or else it ends up destroying the defender.
It really is a fascinating mirror held up to our shared human nature. And it brings us to a final thought I want to leave you with today. In the material we examined, Bertuzzi explicitly states that his final foundational rule is, don't forget that Christianity is true. That is his anchor. But regardless of where you stand listening to this, whether you are a devout, lifelong believer, a staunch atheist, or somewhere totally in between, it makes you wonder. If your pursuit of the truth constantly damages your mental health, isolates you from your loved ones, and makes you treat people who disagree with you with snark and contempt, wait, are you actually defending the truth, or are you just defending yourself? Thank you for exploring with us today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.